these beings are very eager to find humans who are enlightened enough to approach them peacefully, because what our covert classified military projects have been doing is to try to track these objects and shoot them down. I mean, their whole game is cat and mouse, where they're trying to destroy them. So,
is that what Star Wars was really about? I mean,
yes.
the satellites and all during the Reagan administration?
Yes, and of course, and I have been, if people go to disclosureproject.org, they'll see that we have testimony from over 100 top-secret military and intelligence witnesses who've dealt with this issue, and a number of them describe our attempts to down and to attack these objects. It's a very dangerous and foolish thing that we're doing, and it's threatening the equilibrium of the world, quite frankly, because...
So when do you think they're coming?
Why?
Yeah.
Well, I think they've been here around for many thousands of years. I seriously doubt it's a recent phenomenon. I think that if you look at this, and in talking to people in British intelligence and the people in the United States military, the real increase in these events happened around the time we started detonating nuclear weapons.
Yeah, I get that.
And at the same time we started going out into space. I mean, I think you have to understand that any civilization that has reached a point of peaceful coexistence, who would see us evolving out of the time of World War II into this post-World War II period where we began to go into space, but at the same time began to develop hydrogen bombs and nuclear weapons, I think this would put a big red flag over this planet. And my understanding is that they're quite concerned about what we're doing to this planet, and that also that we not be turned loose on the universe, where we could be a threat to other planets that are existing peacefully and do not even have the concept of warfare and weapon systems. And so
because it's not just about this planet, right? I mean, it's about what happens on this planet affects the totality of reality.
Of course, in every thought and conscious action, but when there are mega system events that happen on a planet like this, it certainly affects other worlds, and it affects the equilibrium of the cosmos in general. So there's a serious reason for their being here. I think, number one, they're observing what we're doing and watching us make this big transition from a fractured sort of warring world to a peaceful civilization, and we are going to make that transition. It may not all be smooth, but we'll make it. And I think, meanwhile, they're wanting to be sure that we don't become a threat elsewhere, and I think they're also wanting to start to open up contact with people who are peaceful and enlightened enough to understand how to make contact and why they should be making contact. Sure. One of the things I point out to people is that a lot of folks will say, well, you know, what if some of them are hostile? I said, well, the only ones that are hostile are the ones that are being manufactured by humans. And the big mythology in the New Age world is that they're the good ones and the bad ones, and in reality, most of that is disinformation created by the intelligence community to scare people, because eventually they would like to have us put all these weapons in space and spend trillions of dollars on Star Wars type stuff. And this is exactly what we've already done it. I mean, but I have folks who worked on these in the 1960s, where we already had weapon systems that were based in space that were targeting these extraterrestrial vehicles. So this has been going on for 40 years. There's
not just one race that's visiting us, though, right? I mean, do you get that?
Oh, there are dozens.
Yeah.
And none of them are hostile, and none of them are harmful. And some of them are quite worried about our hostility and have done things to try to contain us. And I think that containment, like a quarantine type of exercise, has enraged some in our classified military projects, and they don't understand why these beings would not want us, for example, to be traveling with our experimental anti-gravity vehicles, which we have, all the way out to Mars or all the way out to some of the other planets. And the reason they don't want us out there is because we're not going out there with the right intention. So the core to making contact with these beings, and the key to humans as a species being welcome in space, is establishing universal peace. World peace won't cut it. Yeah. It's not going to be enough just that we have peace on Earth. We also have to have universal peace, which is what we're telling people, is that it has to evolve into an understanding that peace has to occur not just on Earth, but our whole attitude towards the cosmos has to become peaceful, or we're not going to be allowed to fulfill our potential to become ourselves interstellar beings.
Boy, Stephen, we have a lot in common. This is awesome. Well, you know what I find fascinating is that there are so many instances where the military has fired on the ships. I mean, even going down to Mexico and interfering with things that were going on down there, our government. And I don't know of any instance where any of the ships have fired back or done anything destructive.
No, it has never happened. And, if you go to a UFO conference, quote unquote, you'll find that at 90 to 95% of everything being shared there is some type of concocted disinformation designed to scare the bejeebies out of people.
Yeah.
Because, just like 9/11, the way that you control the masses is through fear, which is the opposite of love and the opposite of peace. And I think that this psychological warfare technique has been used since the beginning of time for demagogues to control the masses. And yet, when our team has gone out all over the world, I mean, you have to understand, we have had an advanced diplomatic team that has gone all over the world to areas where these ET beings are being seen. We've made contact. We've had nothing but the most beautiful and peaceful encounters. All these stories of mutilation and abductions and torture and sexual rape and all this negative, horrible stuff, that's all disinformation or counterintelligence activities. Now, there are people in the classified programs that are human that stage those events for their psychological warfare purposes. I have a document from 1953 where the CIA stated that one of the key values of the UFO issue would be in their psychological warfare value. And it's a very interesting document. And I have another document. People need to get this book called Disclosure that have all these government documents that we have acquired and the testimony of all these military and intelligence witnesses, because they describe clearly what is really going on behind the scenes and why the media is deceived and why the public is deceived on this issue. And one of the deceptions is to try to present this idea that there's some kind of hostile threat from outer space, because they're trying to lay the foundation for future war in space. And this is what we have to resist. We have to resist this siren song of greed coming from the military-industrial complex and the sort of orthodox eschatologists, the people who would like to figure out how to precipitate an end-of-the-world scenario like these books Left Behind and all this sort of fundamentalism. Those are the guys running this program.
Yeah.
These classified programs are filled with really kooky people from the lunatic fringe of the religious extremists. And so people have to understand that this is the opposite of where our civilization is really headed, and these are the dying gasps of a dying world order.
There was something that I read in your book that kind of stunned me, and although it didn't surprise me, it was just, and that is that there are certain abduction programs that are being funded by people on the Earth.
Oh, yeah. Well, these are, if it's an abduction, it's human. If it's contact, it's ET. I tell people this is all linguistic, perhaps, but there are lots of people who've had ET contact, and there are lots of people who've been victims of these abductions, which are run by humans. For example, I have personally interviewed several military men, one of whom was an Army Ranger, who worked on special projects that were compartmented, where they were using what are called alien reproduction vehicles. And these are things that look like a flying saucer or UFO that's made by Lockheed and Northrop. And they had either costumes on or used what are called PLFs, program life forms, that look like extraterrestrial beings, but they're not. They're completely man-made, to abduct or frighten people so that there would begin to be this subculture awareness of fear, and so that they can eventually ramp that up in sort of a cosmic Gulf of Tonkin scenario to stampede military and political leaders and the masses into accepting the cost of building weapons in space and getting into an interplanetary war. It's a matter of public record that General Douglas MacArthur, in his last speech to Congress, stated that, quote, World War III will be interplanetary war. So this has been in the planning stages since at least the 60s and perhaps the 50s. And so much of the imaging and so much of the subculture awareness on this is being driven by a virulent, well-funded, and high-tech human technological disinformation campaign that's designed to scare people. And what I tell people is that you've got to be able to look through this, it's like the movie The Matrix, this sort of matrix of deception and nonsense, and see what's really true. Because people, unfortunately, because of our sort of primitive brains, have this flight or fight response and tend to believe a threat because we're trained in our tribal roots to be paranoid of the unknown.
Right.
It's the roots of racism. It's the roots of hatred. And I think that this is something we have to resist because there are people who are deliberately throwing fuel on that fire in a very deceptive way. And what I've tried to explain in this new book is that I have gone into meetings with folks who are in charge of those deceptive programs and have actually acquired documents from institutes that are planning this, quote, I'm using the term used in this top secret document, stagecraft, to simulate these sort of frightening experiences. So I tell people, don't be afraid of the extraterrestrial visitors, but you should be very concerned about these other agendas, and we have to be the counterbalance to that. See, we're the children of Earth, and we alone can transform this planet and prepare it for a time of universal peace.
But people that are contactees do go onto the ships, and sometimes I know do get certain markings on their bodies or other things. And when I read that, where I went was into confusion about, okay, what's what? That's kind of where it took me. You know, okay, if you're a contactee, you pretty well know you are for the most part. But then you get in, then, you know, you start finding that you have marks on your body or different things, which I've talked about on the show before. It's a subject that I'm very interested in. And I was just a little confused about the difference there and what you were talking about.
Well, I think there are people who have had actual contact with ETs that then have one of these paramilitary groups engage them in a pseudo contact event that's an abduction, and so that's deliberately confusing. Okay. And I think that you have to take every case on its own merits. I know when they have tried to target people in my group with that kind of experience, because we have this information, we have documents and insider whistleblower testimony about the technologies they're using to do this. We're able to discern between the false contact disinformation events, abductions, and the real contact events. But, you know, this is where knowledge really is power. Without the knowledge that there's the real thing versus this Memorex pseudo thing, you're not going to be able to distinguish it. And unfortunately, I think many people can't imagine that the human capabilities have evolved to where they have. And I point out to people that many of the capabilities that I'm describing existed by the 1950s. We're unlimited in scope of consciousness and what we're able to do with it. No, I'm talking about classified projects that have have weapon systems and things that look like UFOs that aren't. And but then there's so many people that have abduction type descriptions and yet no real memories. They think it was a dream, or they wake up with marks and they don't know where they're coming from. And that's why I got confused about what you were talking about. I just wanted to clarify it for me as much as everybody else. Well, you have to take each case on its merits, and you're not going to know is it real or is it Memorex without doing a very careful investigation. The problem is that if you go to people who deal with this issue, they don't know that there's a parallel human deception program that's extremely high-tech, and they're going to confuse the real contact with the false stuff. Why? Because they don't know the false is even possible. And I remember talking to someone who did research on this once, and when I started talking about the EG&G, which is a big high-tech electronics company that was making the implants, the involvement of E-Systems and Raytheon, the fact that Northrop and SAIC and Lockheed were building things that look absolutely like an ET craft, but they're man-made, the whole concept of stagecraft. They didn't know this whole body of evidence. And I'm going, well, you better learn about it because you're not going to be able to discern. It's like a doctor not knowing the difference between chest pain from a heart attack and chest pain from a pneumonia that's eaten into the lining of the lungs or something. So, you know, you've got to have a differential diagnosis, and knowledge is the greatest purifier, it says in the Bhagavad Gita, and that's very, very true. Unfortunately, most of what is out there that passes for information on this subject, which is consumed in books and videos and TV shows and what have you, is deliberate false information or disinformation designed for a certain psychological conditioning response, primarily to condition people to be afraid. And what I've said to people is, well, let's put all that aside and let's actually go out to these places and make contact with a group of people who understand the technology of contact. And we go out not only with these consciousness technologies we're using, but also with laser systems and electromagnetic sounds that we send up and all these things. And we, and see what happens and just see if there's anything to be afraid of. And there's not. I mean, the only time we've ever had anything remotely frightening is when we've been, chased by police or had, military helicopter aircraft come down and put searchlights on us and things like this. But nothing from the ETs has been at all worrisome. It's all been humans. So I tell people that a lot of, in a sense, this is sort of a cosmic Rorschach test. It's a sort of a cosmic mirror. The way people view this is a reflection of their own inner state of knowledge and consciousness.